Friendship League. And as many of you know, as Friends of Israel, today in Israel is a solemn day. It's a day where Yom HaShoah is commemorated and people remember. People all around the country stop and think about the enormity of the event that we know as the Shoah. And today I'm really so delighted to be joined by two amazing people from the film world who are going to share a story that even if you're familiar with it, you must see the film in order to fully appreciate what we've learned about this amazing history. You know, we have a lot of people who have checked in and signed in from Carmiel to Kuwait, I see in the chat. So if you wouldn't mind, tell us where you're calling in from today. And if you've been in Israel during Yom HaShoah, maybe just one word, whether you're on Facebook or live on Zoom with us, one word about your impression, your feeling, what it feels like during that moment when you hear the siren and you're called to remember in a way that's very different than perhaps other kinds of commemorations and celebrations that you might be familiar with. So we have people really from all over, from Santa Cruz and from Virginia Beach, Los Angeles, Manchester, England. And, you know, we see sadness. We see a recognition that this is a very heavy day. Yet there are inspirations that come from the day as well. We have two master storytellers with us today, both from the discipline of film, who are going to help us learn about an amazing story. First of all, our director, Roberta Grossman, who is a history buff. I mean, she got her first degree was in history from UC Berkeley, and then went on to get her master's from the American Film Institute in film. And so she has combined those two disciplines. I can't think of a better way to try to tackle this story. She has 4 feature documentaries, one of which is so dear to my heart, Hava Nagila. If you haven't seen that one, you must, because anyone that has danced at a joyous moment knows what it means. But as we know, this story that she is telling today, an incredible and amazing story that really has chosen a very special way to tell this story that we'll learn about today. And I should mention she's also the winner of the 2018 Visionary Award at my hometown film festival, the Washington Jewish Film Festival. So we're so grateful to have your films reaching far and wide. Our executive producer today joining us on this film, and her films have appeared in other webinars that we've promoted as well in our series. This series, you know, is in partnership with the Israel Office of Cultural Affairs at the Consulate of Israel in New York. We're so grateful to have that partnership and to have met Nancy Spielberg through that partnership. Indeed, you get a lot of scripts and you get a lot of opportunities to tell stories that really are very important. So we're so grateful to have that. You've studied both on the West Coast and as well as on the East Coast at Sarah Lawrence and the New School, in particular in the filmmaking. Your films tell stories of justice, including elusive justice. You have charities and projects that you've taken on about the subjects of your films around them, in particular related to children, including Children of Chernobyl, Project Sunshine, and as well as a founder of something called the Jewish Story Partners, attempting to tell stories that are perhaps a little bit more difficult and a little bit more involving the diversity and the complexity of the Jewish people. And indeed, this story is included probably in that list. So let's dive in. I know when we had our discussion in advance, Nancy described Roberta's passion and commitment to tell this story over what was a 7-year journey. Roberta, before we show a clip on this, could you maybe just tell us about what drove you, over the course of this very complicated film?
Sure, thank you very much. I was working on another film, starting to develop another film that took place between the wars in Warsaw. And as many of your audience, I'm sure, know, that was a very rich cultural spot for Jews between the wars, a very vibrant Jewish community or communities. And I read a review of Sam Kassow's book, Who Will Write Our History, and I got it and started reading it. And I was, 5 pages in when I was basically thrown back against the wall as if a tornado was in my room, that this, it was obvious to me, was the most important unknown story of the Holocaust, or at least unknown to a broad audience. I abandoned that other project and immediately contacted Sam Kassow and began what was, I think it was an 8-year journey to make this film. And then the journey continues until today. We released the film in 2018. But as I think of it, the story is sadly evergreen because the end of the story doesn't change. So I hope the film will continue to teach people about the Oyneg Shabbes archive, the secret archive of the Warsaw Ghetto, and the people who created it for many, many years to come. I mean, that was Nancy and my intention, was that we were making a film about an archive, but making the film itself an archive of their stories, an archive of the Warsaw Ghetto, an archive of Warsaw and Polish Jewry.
Nancy, I'm going to assume that you get a lot of scripts and a lot of leads on potential stories that could be told. Like, how did you know that this was a story, that this was the time to tell it, and when did your involvement with the project start?
So Roberta and I met when I was producing Above and Beyond, and I met her and asked her if she would direct it. And we were such an incredible partnership. And as we were filming that and we were on location, she was on the phone with people in Poland constantly, developing this other project. And she had told me about it. And, in the beginning, I was a little hesitant because, people say they hear Spielberg, they think Schindler's List. And I think, oh, my God, I can't fill those shoes. And maybe I don't want to go there. On the other hand, I also was learning from Roberta's stories about the Holocaust that I didn't know, because I grew up with very little knowledge of the Holocaust. And in the end, it was really my honor. Roberta and I talked about whether I would come on board. So I came on board mostly raising money. Roberta is the writer, director, producer. It is what runs through her veins. And she was so immersed in it. So I could do what I could to support that and move that forward. So she was on location in Poland for a very long time. I showed up for 5 days. I got the easy job, but I, have to raise the money because these are done as not-for-profit. So that's actually not an easy job. So, but anyway, it's
Nancy, you're self-deprecating. You didn't just raise the money. You were intricately involved from A to Z. And I'd also like to point out that you didn't decide exactly to be involved in the project, but I told you I was going to kidnap and hold your beloved limbo until you agreed to come on board. So
I was softening it, Roberta. I'm changing the narrative here.
Well, the playfulness with which the two of you have toward each other after this project of love is really a great way to start it. And so and first thing, I just want to I don't want to bury the lead here. Everyone here on the call, at the end of the call, we are going to send out a link to all of the registrants, and the first 500 people who reply to that can get a link to see the entire film. And so that's our Yom HaShoah present to everyone. We think this story is so compelling and so important to be told that we've made those arrangements, and we will send that out to everyone on in a separate communication following the call today. We are going to show a few selected highlights just to sort of give you some context for the viewing of that film and to understand a little bit about some of the main players, as it were. So why don't we'll cue up the first segment, which will give a bit, it's the trailer for the film, so it'll give you a little bit of an overview, and then we'll take a look at some very specific characters in our discussion afterwards.
years ago, there was a mother who knew that her son was the cleverest, the most talented, the most beautiful. And now the brightest and most beautiful child in the world lies in a strange street. And his name isn't even known.
We should have seen the worst coming. But we did not want to know the truth. We did not want to see it.
Does the world know about our suffering?
Emanuel Ringelblum understood that he had a story to tell, and it was the most important story he would ever have to tell.
Almost all the photography that we have was taken by the German propaganda unit.
Will the Germans write our history, or will we write our history?
Let the witness be our writing.
Their goal was to write the history of the war from the Jewish perspective. And there was no time to lose.
The worst scenario was in the process of happening.
Writing becomes the only recourse. That was the ultimate act of defiance.
You don't really need guns to fight. You could fight with paper and pen.
This is what made this collection of documents so absolutely unique.
One thing is clear to all of us. Our devotion and constant terror have not been in vain.
Among those taken away was Rabbi Uberman,
Geli Sexton,
Israel Lichtenstein,
Leib Golden,
Abraham Levin,
Halina,
Emanuel Ringelblum.
Remember, my name is Nahum Gazivich.
I am writing this as a witness.
Wow, there's so much in that trailer to unpack that I'm not even sure where we begin. But I do, Roberta, I want to ask about your initial creative choice, dramatization. And you've worked on documentaries that tell the story from different perspectives. Can you tell us a little bit about when you made that decision, when you understood certain aspects of the story would be best told using actors and creating a visual narrative that it explains a lot of the materials you were looking at?
Well, the writing in the Oyneg Shabbes archive is really so powerful and so excellent and so evocative and so personal. I mean, most of what most of us know about the Holocaust comes from survivor testimony and documents, right? So what we have in the case of the Oyneg Shabbes archive that's so incredible is eyewitness testimony, people writing, experiencing and writing about their experiences in the moment. So it has a unique kind of power. And then there was these, Ringelblum gathered around him, these, Jewish intellectuals, many of whom were writers, poets, journalists, and their writing was spectacular. So there was nothing really to illustrate the writing, the visuals, because it is a film that would meet the level of excellence of the writing and the immediacy. So it seemed to me that the members of the Oyneg Shabbes wanted two things primarily. One was to have the story of the war and the Jewish experience during the war told from the Jewish point of view, and the other was to be remembered as individuals. So with those two things in mind, really three things in mind: the eyewitness nature, the desires of the Oyneg Shabbes, and the desire to make a compelling film that people would actually watch, led me to decide to make the perhaps risky decision to dramatize what some of the stories and to let us come to know and love the characters of the Oyneg Shabbes Ringelblum and his compatriots. The other thing is that the only thing we have visually from the Warsaw Ghetto are photographs. Primarily, there were some photographs taken by Jews in the ghetto, but primarily what we have is footage and photographs taken by the Nazi propaganda units. So there was nothing and that was shot in a particular way to show the Jews are degraded, they don't care about one another, they're filthy, they're dirty. So in other words, they created the Nazis created these miserable conditions and then filmed people in them and blamed them for it. So there was nothing to show the forming of the Oyneg Shabbes itself or the individuals of the Oyneg Shabbes with their families in their quiet moments. So that was the decision that was made in the hopes to make the film that would have the gravitas of a documentary and then the emotional pull and cinematic excellence, hopefully, of a feature film.
Also, Wayne, the pit we didn't want to fall into the talking heads, the historians and the scholars and the same footage or photographs that we've all seen too many times, because you do not capture your audience that way. And this was really, as Roberta said, the best script was the script written by those people who wrote those diaries, and just to bring their words. When you watch the film, when the audience watches the film, they need to realize that every word that they're hearing is the written word of the people. So, and it was their dying wish that they would be remembered. So it's almost like an audience participation, that you are hearing their voices, even though they are actors, but it is their hand that penned those words. So, that becomes very powerful.
Did you, Roberta said that it was clearly a risk in doing this. Did you hit any pushback? When you were first approaching people about the film, and I mean, were there doubts about it, about that was the right choice, or did people understand the premise of what you're trying to create?
I don't think there was any pushback, because Roberta has a track record of doing, incredible dramatizations. In fact, I approached her and asked her to direct Above and Beyond because I had watched the Blessings of the Match, the Hannah Senesh film she did, which had those dramatizations, and they were beautiful. And filmmakers, a lot of times, they go, dramatizations, ugh, like don't. And I said, I hate dramatizations. And Roberta says, I don't do bad dramatizations. And she was right. So I think there was a comfort level, and I felt very confident that it was being managed in the most sensitive manner, and mostly with somebody who has that depth of knowledge on the topic. And plus Sam Cassaw was also there constantly whispering in everybody's ear, the 10 years of his knowledge and gathering of knowledge. It took him, I think, 10 years to write the book. So felt confident.
Roberta, I think that's one of the remarkable aspects of this, working with a historian and hearing his, people have already asked about the interest in reading the book, his book as well. How did you sort of blend together your visual, your vision of the film with his narrative from the book to turn it into such a powerful script?
Well, I mean, I worked very, very closely with Sam all the way through. It was a true collaboration. We were hand in glove for the whole time. And there's no point in making a documentary at great expense of time and treasure, and then having it come out and having scholars say that it's riddled with inaccuracies. That was the last thing we wanted. So we worked very, very closely, not only with Sam, who is the world expert on the subject of the Oyneg Shabbes, and his book is a masterwork of history. It's the same title as the film, Who Will Write Our History? But we had a panel of eminent scholars who, including Barbara Kirschenbach-Gimlet, David Roskies, and others who they were involved at every stage of the way. They read scripts, they looked at cuts, and they were extremely critical, which was not always fun, but it was for the best of the film.
One of the things, one of the statements in the trailer he makes is that the material was all there for his book, yet the telling of the story in the film is from your perspective, not from the perspective of the Nazi propagandists who may have created some of the material that was utilized. And that was not something I really fully appreciated until viewing this. At what point did you get that was that you were going to have to take take their stuff and crafted in a narrative that other people could understand. And did you ever feel like you needed to sort of wash your hands?
No, I was and am completely comfortable about using that material. A scholar who spoke at a screening of ours in Warsaw reminded the audience of the arc of the triumphal arc that's in Rome that shows bringing Jewish Hebrew slaves back to Rome after the destruction of the temple, and he said, well, this is all we have. This is a moment of defeat, created by the conqueror. Perhaps we shouldn't use it, but look at the people. You could see how they're dressed. At the Hebrew slaves, how they're dressed. They're carrying a menorah. We learn so much from it. So I think the same is true for the Nazi propaganda footage and photographs. It is real. They were taking those images in the ghetto. I mean, what their perspective was and their goal, their point of view, can be mitigated through choosing which parts of the images to use. So, for example, when the footage just shows sort of life or people, and is not overtly propagandistic, we used it as archival footage. When it's overtly propagandistic, for example, there's a series of 3 or 4 takes of a woman carrying a bundle just stepping over a dead man on the street as if she didn't care about him. This was done to show, it was set up to show that the Jews didn't care about one another. And you can see the woman becoming progressively more terrified. So when we use material like that, we actually put on the screen Nazi propaganda footage. So, I felt like I trusted myself enough, and then the scholars were looking at it very carefully too, to be able to use this potentially toxic material and to use it to good effect, like chemo or something. Too much, not used carefully, it can kill you. Used properly, it can save your life.
Wow, great point. Nancy, the telling of Holocaust stories, some thought, okay, after Schindler's List, we've told the big story, enough. But yet we're learning and hearing about more stories, survivors sharing narratives that have such nuance to it, that is such an important part of what has been, this after period. Can you comment on what you see the contribution that film is making in this area, particularly nonprofit films that are able to take advantage of new technologies and making material that would be maybe just sit in a historian's book or in a museum somewhere, but bringing it to this larger audience?
Well, I think that we are forced to find different tools in our creative toolbox because of the times we're in. We are losing our survivors. We're losing our World War II veterans. We're losing that generation. We have a society that's very visual. We have younger people that don't want to read. And so we do have to stretch. We do have to work on dramatizations. There's also a lot of animation being used. And I remember somebody came to me 8 years ago telling me that they had a Holocaust story that they wanted to tell animated. And my initial reaction was, I was appalled. How can you, because animate to us, we used to think animate meant cartoon, and cartoon meant funny or disrespectful. And to me, you just couldn't blend those. But in fact, it is handled in a way that is not disrespectful. It is, it evokes reactions from the audience. And what do we want? We want the audience to react. We want them to find empathy and to understand what this means, not, to all the sufferers, all the people, Jews, non-Jews, everything, this kind of treatment, humanity to humanity. And so we do have to create it in a way that we will be able to hold on to audiences from all demographics. So, that's sort of what happens. Animation, dramatization, these all are becoming important tools.
So you see potentially more of that, that still, yeah, we're not.
I do. And I just hope that it's done tastefully. I think that it's funny, like one discussion that we had with Who Wrote Our History is there were some scenes we were questioning whether we should colorize them. And that became a huge argument. Do you colorize footage from that time. In fact, we were able to uncover actual color footage of Warsaw before, the Holocaust, and that was a wonderful find. But do we take some of the treasured, archival footage and colorize? And that's anyway a hot topic in Hollywood too. Do we colorize? So in the end, we did not. The colorization that is used is on the dramatizations, and any color footage that exists was actually color in the beginning. So you have to just tread lightly. You have to be very sensitive.
So we're already getting lots of questions from the audience about the Oyneg Shabbes archive. And I have to tell you, Roberta, when we were first talking and I knew we needed to spend time on these two powerful characters, I was debating whether the protagonist here was actually Ringelblum or actually the archive itself. You've managed to tap into both of those things. So let's start with a clip on Ringelblum and then take it from there in terms of his place in history here.
This was a time when the Jewish leadership of Warsaw was running east. So the Jewish community of Warsaw was left without leadership. Emanuel Ringelblum could have run, he could have escaped. Nobody had appointed him as a leader. He just stepped forward and he decided to do it.
Wer wird bleiben mit mir von allen Teufel?
So, Roberta, tell us a little bit about Ringelblum and the kind of leadership that you saw emerge from a historian.
Sure. Well, Ringelblum is a fascinating character, and my feeling, one of the reasons why I wanted to make the film, and I think Sam might agree with me on this. I mean, obviously he loves Ringelblum. I love Ringelblum, and to me, he should be as well known as Ben Gurion. Sometimes I think he should be as well known as Moses. I mean, he was a really remarkable figure, and yes, he was a historian. He was also a political activist. He was very involved in the creation of the historical department of YIVO, his politics, he was a leftist, and his politics and his work as a historian really were quite blended in that he believed in history from the bottom up, which does not seem particularly remarkable today, but I think he was really an innovator in that area. In other words, history is not only about the generals and the kings and, in the case of the Jewish world, the rabbis. It was about the everyday person, the cobbler, the woman, baking. So he really believed in that. And in YIVO, they did this thing, the collecting they called Sammling, which was that they reached out to communities all over Eastern Europe and asked people, individuals, to send stuff to YIVO. YIVO was the Yiddish Institute for Yiddish Research. It was started in the 1920s in Vilna, and it was a huge archive. And people would send poems and recipes and songs and photographs and drawings. And basically, the Oyneg Shabbes archive was YIVO in the ghetto. Ringelblum reached out to all different kinds of people. At that time, it could end a family relationship or a marriage would not happen if two people belonged to different political parties. But in the Oyneg Shabbes, Ringelblum really wanted everybody because he wanted as many points of view and as many perspectives as possible. So he brought together these people and they created this enormous archive. At the end of the day, we have 60,000 or so pages of archival material from the Warsaw Ghetto. And so you said this, who was the protagonist, Ringelblum or the archive, and I don't think you can distinguish between them. I mean, or you could say perhaps that the archive was Ringelblum's child. I mean, he gave birth to it, if you would. So it was his life work. It was his passion.
There was a question that came in from one of the viewers about whether we know if all of the Oyneg Shabbes materials have been recovered from the archive. Did you have any sense of that, whether that rescue operation of the material itself was successful?
Yeah, we know quite clearly that everything wasn't recovered. The archive was buried in 3 caches at 3 different times. The first and second were recovered, and the third has never been recovered. There was an effort about 10 years ago by an Israeli team of archaeologists working with at that time, the most sophisticated radar and other kinds of techniques to look beneath the ground. We know that the archive, that third cache, was buried where the Chinese embassy in Warsaw sits now. And they dug for 6 weeks and they didn't find anything. Sam Casso thinks that it won't be found.
Sam, I think they said they found a few remnants of some burnt paper. So they felt that either it was destroyed or it was looted and destroyed, because that happened a lot of times. With the second cache that was found, it was found by accident by construction workers that were digging and renovating, rebuilding the city. And when they found these, all the documents were buried in tin boxes and milk cans. The rumor was that the Jews buried all the diamonds and jewels. So of course they ripped open the milk cans and saw paper, and were discouraged and were about to chuck it all when their foreman came back and said, "Wait, I know what that is." And he, it turns out, had a Jewish girlfriend, and he had helped her smuggle some things out in the past. And he saved those documents, and luckily, and took them to, who did he take them to?
Jewish Historical Institute.
Jewish Historical Institute. So, that was a close call there. We would have lost the second cache as well.
And that second cache has Ringelblum's diary, Abraham Lewin's diary, incredibly valuable material.
Do we know where? I know we're going to show a clip a little bit later, but that one of our viewers is asking about the name Oyneg Shabbes. Why? I don't know if that was an attempt to disguise what Nancy was alluding to, but do we know anything actually about the intentionality of the name?
Yeah. They met on Saturdays. It was a code name, and it was tongue in cheek, because Oyneg Shabbes is the joy of Shabbat, which sometimes refers to either studying, rest, sexual relations on Shabbat. So it was a code name.
Can you speak? Obviously, one of the major themes here is a form of cultural resistance that was a choice of many people involved in the project, and perhaps an aspect of the Holocaust resistance that's a little bit less known. Could you maybe speak about how why that part of this story really needs to be understood?
Sure. Right after the war, especially in Israel, that was building up this kind of a strength identity, right? The people who were valorized were the resistors of the Warsaw Ghetto, the fighters of the Warsaw Ghetto. And that was the model for resistance. And as scholars and survivors and readers and people who think about the Shoah have come to realize that there are many, many, many forms of resistance. And one of the forms of resistance is categorized under the broad term spiritual resistance. And that includes writing. And everywhere that Jews were, during the Shoah, they were writing, and things are still being found. It wasn't that long ago that a glass bottle with writing from some of the Sonderkommando were found, I believe, at Auschwitz. So, we all want to be known, right? And we all want to be known from our own truth and our own perspective. I know when I die, I don't want the person who hates me most doing my eulogy. And if the Germans, or the Nazis rather, hated the Jews enough to kill 6 million of them in this most horrific industrialized and also hand-to-hand murder, we definitely didn't want them writing the obituary of the Jewish people, nor did we want there to be an obituary at all. And one of the only ways available to Jews during the Shoah on their terrible conditions was to write. And so what Ringelblum buried in the archive was not just facts and statistics and essays and children's diaries and others' diaries, newspapers. It was also the truth. They were bearing the truth. And it was very important to them that, God forbid, if the Nazis prevailed, but that there would be some way that the truth would get out and survive even if they didn't. So that was the thrust. And I think that that's a very old argument. What's stronger, the pen or the sword? And I don't have a definitive opinion about that. But Ringelblum had a pen, and he wielded it to great effect.
Also one thing to remember about the archives is yes, it's spiritual resistance, but it also is a time capsule of life, and showing not just how they were being killed, but how they lived. The concerts, the music, there's paintings, there, like Roberta said, there's beggars' jokes. So we actually have this eyeglass into life in the Warsaw Ghetto, because most of us, when we think of the Warsaw Ghetto, we think all about the destruction and the death. I never could have imagined that there would be dance troupes and concerts, that just didn't, but they made a point of holding on to their humanity and their culture, because, and that, so I guess that is resistance, that they would not be dehumanized, but it's also a wonderful time capsule for us to see what life was like then.
I want to add one more thing, Wayne, before you go on, if you don't mind, and that is that it was also an active form of resistance in that there's a book out now about the women in the resistance in the ghettos, but they were couriers from the Warsaw Ghetto and other ghettos that looked Aryan, looked non-Jewish, and they were going around to the different ghettos and collecting information and bringing it back to the Oyneg Shabbes in the case of the Warsaw Ghetto. And Ringelblum compiled that really factual, solid evidence about what was going on, about the mass murder of Jews. And they were able to smuggle it out through the Polish underground to the Polish government in exile in London, and from them to London. And the BBC was the first to announce, based on Ringelblum's materials, what was going on in Poland, that the mass murder was occurring. So, obviously the hope was when people learned this and they had the facts to back it up and it could be believed, that rescue would come, right? Sadly, it didn't. I think that broadcast from the BBC saying what was going on in Poland and Eastern Europe, I think at that time, I don't remember, Nancy, was 700,000 Jews had been killed or something like that they had documented. But then the Great Deportation, the first major deportation of Jews from Warsaw to Treblinka started, I believe, a month later. Please don't shoot me if I'm wrong. Very soon thereafter. So rescue didn't come, but that was a very active form of resistance.
So we have a question from Marcia about Poland. So I guess I want to start, Roberta, just how much time did you actually spend filming there and working on the project? And I think the underlying premise of the question is what kind of reactions did you get from local people and in the period that you were there, and then we'll talk about after the film was made. But while you were actually filming this, and Nancy, I know you made a trip as well, I'm curious just to hear I've spent time in Poland, in Warsaw, and I people come back with different impressions.
Well, my impression was that I was working with a film crew, and film crews are an international tribe. And they were, those Polish film crews were the best I've ever worked with. And they were passionately committed to telling the story of the Oyneg Shabbes, Ringelblum's story. The actors were passionately committed. The lead actors, who were Polish actors, learned their lines in Yiddish. They studied about Ringelblum. The man who played Ringelblum knew about Ringelblum and beforehand. The woman who played Arabak read so much of her writing, and they inhabited those people. And I'm very grateful to them for doing that. And the crews were, some of the members of the crews had grandparents who had been in the Polish side of the resistance. And some of the people, the actors and the extras, were actually Jews, whose families had been in Warsaw. The women who are in Auerbach's kitchen, those of you who haven't seen the film will see they some of them are Yiddish-speaking Polish Jewish actors. So they were wonderful, very, very committed. We also received money from the Polish government to help support the film project. And that funding came right before the change in government. And I don't necessarily think we would have gotten that funding under the current government, but we did receive help from the Polish government.
That's really nice. Good to know. Nancy, has the film been aired in Poland, and what kind of reaction, if any?
Well, there were several times. First, we actually had a very large screening at the Poland Museum, which was packed and very well accepted. And we were a little concerned because it was right at the time where I think there was a big fight between Israel and the Polish government and the whole idea of the semantics of Poles being involved with the Nazis. So we were a little nervous about some of the lines in the film, but in the end, it all worked out. But beyond that, we had a global simultaneous screening of the film partnered with World Jewish Congress and UNESCO in 2019 on International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Then the film screened in over 355 venues, 55 countries, 16 languages. Well, no, Poland alone had 55 screenings, and just that one day. So there was actually a lot of interest. Plus, it's being used for with high school kids to teach them what Jews are and what their country looked like back then. And so it's been widely accepted. We really have not had any bad reaction. That, unless Roberta, I missed something, I don't think we've had anybody try to censor us.
I think that it's self-selecting who sees the film and who engages with it.
Fair enough.
Every country, I think just like in the United States, there's red states and blue states, and Warsaw is a blue state.
Mm-hmm. One of the real contributions to this story is another heroine, Rachel Auerbach. And I wonder, Roberta, if you could tell, perhaps before we show the clip, if you could describe what you learned about her and why she needs to be a name that, like Ringelblum, is well known, and how you went about telling her story and involving her.
Well, I started my relationship with Rachel Auerbach in a utilitarian way, in that I thought she was the perfect narrator of the story. She was part of Ringelblum's Yiddishist intellectual milieu before the war. She was in the ghetto. She ran a soup kitchen. She stayed, didn't escape Warsaw at Ringelblum's request. She became a member of the Oyneg Shabbes archive. She was one of 3 of 60 people in the archive who lived to tell the tale, and she spent the rest of her life doing so, including creating the Yad Vashem Survivor Testimony Department. So, and she was a really fantastic writer. Her writing is so vivid and so powerful. And she was devoted, as I said, to maintaining the memory of the Oyneg Shabbes, of Ringelblum, of the other Jewish intellectuals of Warsaw. So there was a lot of writing to pull from. So initially, I just thought she was the perfect narrator. Of course, I came to love and admire her. She was a very prickly pear. I mean, she really rubbed people the wrong way from day one to day end. She was very outspoken, loved to pick a fight, or just very, very opinionated and very, I'll just leave it at that. And, but I think she is a very, very important chronicler of the Holocaust. And I think her contribution to survivor testimony is huge. And what she was doing there led to, is a precursor to Nancy's Brothers Shoah Foundation and a lot of other organizations that have collected testimony. And also, on a final note, she convinced Gideon Hausner, the prosecutor of the Eichmann trial, to base that trial on survivor testimony. And she sat with him and went through people who could tell different parts of the story. And she would tell him, well, this person never shuts up, don't use him. This person, can't talk without crying. This person's a pain in the ass. This person is excellent. This person can because she knew all the testimony and she knew the history so well. And so, and also she testified in the Eichmann trial, and it was really tragic because she wanted to speak about the Oyneg Shabbes, and she started to, and she was cut off by the prosecutor, she was cut off by the judge. And although the entire Eichmann trial was shot at all times by 5 cameras, for some weird reason, the cameras were turned off when she was testifying. And she was so heartbroken by the way that her testimony had been truncated and really went nowhere. That was really sort of a final blow for her. She died not that long after that.
Wow. Well, let's see a clip of her. I think that this is an important element that you really captured. And we'll talk about why there's so few women's voices of this stature that get told. But let's take a look at the Rachel Auerbach piece.
Rachel Auerbach belongs to the first generation of Polish Jews who got a higher education. She became a journalist and a leading member of the Yiddish-Polish intelligentsia.
She was very conscious of the importance of the archive for the future history of the Holocaust. And she was urging constantly, we need to find the archive. This is our national treasure. We cannot just let it go.
So why is it that we have so few women as part of our narratives of Jewish history in particular? And how did you find a way, to sort of elevate that? And Nancy, I'm curious if there's more interest, not only in Gal Gadot, but in other women heroines from our history, not only our imaginations.
I definitely think there's more and more interest. I actually, and it could be that it was something that has been a slow evolution. When you talk about somebody like Golda Meir, which is going to be a film as well, there are strong women in all walks of life, and they're coming out. I'm not as sensitive to it now because I'm seeing it. When I even looking at the films that were nominated for an Oscar this year, there are a lot of lead female characters, and directors and writers. So I really think that it's become a much stronger force. Roberta, I don't know if you feel any differently.
I don't feel any differently. You're so well-spoken in such a gentle manner. And I was going to say the answer to the question is, why do we have so few voices? I was going to say something like, well, there's the patriarchy, but Ringelblum was unusual, really, in that regard, in that he did lift up women's voices. And he even said, at the time, think about, the 1940s, the 1930s, 40s. It was not a period where women were really, it was still a very traditional society. But Ringelblum really lifted up women's voices, not only Auerbach, there were others. And he even said in his diary something funny. He said that women really rose to the fore in the ghetto, in part because men were often in large numbers, taken away for labor gangs and in terrible conditions. And if they did return, which they often didn't, they were sort of broken. So women really had to rise up to take care of their kids and their families. But they rose up in the self-help organizations in the ghetto, and Ringelblum said, well, the way the Jewish women have behaved, and risen to the occasion during the war, after the war, we're going to see basically said we're going to see a complete women's liberation. But he didn't, they weren't the terms he used, but he really saw that there was this cultural shift. And I think that's part of his bottom-up philosophy about history.
We've got one more clip that I want to make sure we get in, and we have several questions related to Oyneg Shabbes itself. And so let's look at the clip, and then I'll post. We have a little more time to delve into some of those questions before we wrap up.
A huge mass of materials that give a picture of the Jewish people under the Nazis are all collected in the Ringelblum archive.
They started to collect documents which, from the point of view of, let's say, 19th century historians, would make no sense. Simple proofs of everyday life and death.
More than 60 members of the Oyneg Shabbes collected artifacts such as German pronouncements, official and underground newspapers, labels on ghetto goods, white Jewish ribbons with the blue Star of David. But to find a cellar within a cellar in which the archive was hidden was almost like an archaeological expedition.
So, Roberta, I know you can't tell everyone's story, but it was really interesting hearing you describe, the group. So, tell us a little bit about some of the other people. Were they all intellectuals? Tell us about some of the materials that people will see in the film. We saw photos, we saw drawings. What's in that archive that remains?
One of the most interesting things that's in the archive, I think there were like 70 photographs that were taken by Jews in the ghetto. And interestingly enough, those photos show things like smuggling, schools, Jewish self-help. They show Jewish agency. Many of the photographs didn't survive because the boxes, the milk cans survived better, but the boxes were waterlogged and like dirt logged. And so a lot of photographs didn't survive. In terms of I think the clip shows very well the range of material that was collected, and it really was quite a range. In terms of who was there, just in terms of Ringelblum had an executive committee. It was a very sophisticated, organized archive or research institute in the hell of the Warsaw Ghetto. And the Ringelblum was the head of it. He had 2 executive secretaries. One of them survived, and then some others. And all of these, like 6 people or 7 people that were in the executive committee, they all worked in the Jewish self-help, which allowed them access to different parts of the ghetto and be able to interview refugees, all kinds of things. It also gave them a stipend so they could survive. And there was Abraham Lewin is a very important person. He was a teacher who taught with Ringelblum before the war. He was a Zionist. His language of choice was Hebrew. There was a rabbi, a Hasidic rabbi, who had lost his wife and son on the first day of the war in a bombing, and his beat, if you will, was the religious Jews in the ghetto and the way they were coping with conditions there and trying to maintain not only their observance but their faith. And there were statisticians, there were journalists, essayists. So it was a range of professional people, economists who talked about the fluctuating value of the currency, who talked about the underground markets and what they did for the ghetto. So it was pretty sophisticated. Well,
the amount of material, as numerous people have commented on, is really itself just remarkable. Obviously created volumes of work about it. Nancy, I know the work that you get involved in is nonprofit, and it is aimed as much at education. And can you share a little bit about what that process is like for people? Like, what does it take to tell a story of a historian? For many of us, this is an incredibly dramatic story, but who out there is supporting it, and how do we make sure more of these kind of stories get told?
Well, it is always tough to raise money, as anybody knows who works in any nonprofit. And we really are, we're independent producers. So we have a 501c3 and not-for-profit. We have lots of people and foundations that we reach out to that, a lot of individuals go for the story. They love a certain story for different reasons. Maybe it's their family's history, or, maybe they are supporters in Israel, or, like Roberta and I are working on a film with Laura Bialis about Roman Vishniak, and which is also an incredible film. And so, we really have to work every piece of this. This is not like go to a big studio and there's a development department and there's a marketing department and there's funding. We just, we always say, like, we raise some money, we start filming. If we run out of money, we go sell some lemonade to make some more money. Then we go back to film. But it's not just the production, it's the distribution, because we do see our films as educational tools. And if you make these films, and many of you know, you go to a film festival you see a great film and you tell your friends about it. And they say, where can I see it? And you say, I don't know. It's gone. Maybe it'll show up on a Netflix. But we really make sure that our films have a place 100%. And find their audience. So that is pounding the pavements. It's the film festivals. It's the streaming. It's the Discovery networks and the Netflix, Amazon. It's all of that. It's broadcasting. What?
Community screenings, Nancy. Community screenings.
We do a ton of community screenings also. So we do a roadshow and we work with educational institutions. That's really important. So you had mentioned before that I'm involved with Jewish Story Partners, which Roberta also is. And this was sort of our, we kept saying, we wish there was a fund to help filmmakers, Jewish, not Jewish, doesn't matter, tell the Jewish story. There's so many, it's such a diverse, word, and it creates understanding. If people really, see all the different, what constitutes the Jewish story, it could be, help promote tolerance. So we, together with Righteous Persons Foundation, which is one of my brother's foundations, and Maimonides Foundation, and several others, we have just, we didn't announce it, actually. I guess I just did, but we're announcing it in a couple of minutes.
Any minute.
You heard it here first.
Yeah. So we are issuing grants, and we are going through submissions, and we want to tell not just wonderful stories, but they really have to be cinematically beautiful. They have to not be crappy. In other words, we're looking for high production value because those are the stories that will be watched.
Great. Well, someone's already asked, how do you submit a story? It sounds like through, I guess, on the Righteous Persons website.
It'll be announced this week, and then we'll launch our website, and it'll be clear how to apply.
Great. Roberta, we're almost at the top of the hour, but maybe just a sentence or two about Vishniak.
Oh, well, Vishniak is a film that Nancy and I are supporting. Filmmaker Laura Bialis, who made other films, including Refusnik, about the history of the Refusnik movement, getting Jews out of the Soviet Union. And it's a story about Roman Vishniak, who's an iconic photographer, both generally and particularly his work in the Eastern Europe before the war. And it's told from the point of view of his daughter, who became the carrier of the legacy. And Laura's doing a great job, and it will be done sometime early in the new year, next year.
Well, I think the most what I've seen in the chat and comments is from Yesher Koach to this is a must-see film for someone who actually saw it on Israel television previously, and in particular a must-see for young people who may not know the story and may, as Nancy, you were alluding to, a more visual, accessible kind of film like this really is something that people can understand and has a sort of timeless quality to it. And so we're so grateful to the two of you for sharing with us what was involved with this remarkable film. We are so excited to be able to share it with 500 more people to see the full film. And so I know people are really anxious about this, and please don't try to, you don't have to have any special protexia or anything. You just need, we will send out the note, and you will sign up and indicate you want to receive it. You only have 2 weeks to actually view it. So it is for a limited distribution. So please make sure you take advantage of that right away. We'll send that out just as we finish. 2 program notes here. As many of you know, in Israel, this is a special time. Some people like me who have only Ulpan Hebrew refer to it as the Yoms. We're coming up on Yom HaAtzmaut, and we have some incredible celebrations that we'll be sharing with you. On this Sunday, we will be have a special guided tour and a hip hop presentation from the Rabin Center in honor of Israel's Independence Day. So Sunday at our regular time at noon. We will not be live on Yom HaAtzmaut. We'll wait till a day after. Normally we broadcast on Wednesdays like today each week, but next week we will be on April 15th. And we will have the world-renowned Israel Opera playing and singing classic Israeli folk songs in a lovely, lovely setting. Last year when we did this opera, we had close to 50,000 viewers around the world. So we hope you'll register and include it as part of your celebration. On Yom HaShoah, on the Wednesday, we'll be partnering with the Israeli Embassy in Washington, D.C., which will be doing a special live broadcast on behalf of Yom HaShoah. We will share those links with you as well this week. If you want to, please participate in all of this. There is ample room as we now are just beginning to see the budding of spring and some cherry blossoms here in DC. We're starting to think about what this means for us coming out of this incredibly, incredibly difficult year for all of us. It's been in isolation. We're so grateful to the artists and the filmmakers and our partners at the Israel Office of Cultural Affairs to help bring some light, to bring some joy into our homes during this period. And we leave you with that. Everyone, please be safe. And thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.